Woman, an in-depth exploration of the world of women today with Sandra Elkin.
Good evening and welcome to Woman. Not very many years ago, the average couple, troubled about their marriage, shied away from marriage counseling, mostly because it was embarrassing to admit failure. Today, by contrast, most husbands and wives feel that there is some value and no stigma in seeking guidance for marital problems. Tonight on Woman, we are going to look at marriage counseling with my guests, David Olson, Professor of Family Studies at the University of Minnesota, and Catherine Chilman, Professor and Coordinator of the Research Program at the School of Social Welfare at the University of Wisconsin at Milwaukee. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Who seeks marriage counseling?
Well, I think traditionally it's been the woman who has, in a relationship, who has tended to be the first person to make a contact with a counselor. She makes the phone call and sets up the appointment either for herself or if she can convince her husband to come along to also bring her husband. I think there's starting to be some change. One change is that I think increasingly couples are starting to come together more often and call and make appointments to be seen as a couple. The other thing is I think men are starting to call because of role changes in our culture, with women increasingly assuming more responsibilities and wanting more changes in their relationship. More and more men have felt threatened and upset about what's happening, and they're now increasingly calling. And I think that also accounts for why more couples are coming rather than just the wife.
Well, I'd say too that a number of the younger men particularly are getting a new vision of human relationships now that there's not so much pressure to be great big heroic he-men. And the women's liberation movement, who just wanted to liberate both men and women to be more humane, is having a large effect on at least some young men who have a vision now of a better marriage relationship. And so they're beginning to initiate it, not only because the women are driving them crazy.
Do you think that means men care more about marriages than they used to?
It's hard to say in general. The graduate school in which I teach, I do find a number of young men who are talking to me about wanting a very high quality of marriage and being very concerned about doing their part to make it a good marriage. In the human sexuality course I teach, there are many men who are wanting to be very open and warm and close and tender and gentle in their human relationships. This isn't everybody, but there's more of this, I think, than there used to be.
You sound encouraged.
Yeah, I think they're wonderful young people. They really turn me on.
Who is the first professional person that the couple seeks out to be?
Well, I think there's probably two. I think ministers and a family doctor. I think those are the first two people, and usually, again, the wife tends to contact and talk to about having a problem in her relationship or in her family. Now, some ministers do some counseling, but I think many of them and many physicians then tend to refer the person, if they have really severe problems, to some kind of counselor.
Well, you know, those are professionals, but I think many people don't really seek, quotes, professional counselors. I think that bartenders hear a lot about marriage problems. Men maybe take them to the bar, and women tell a lot of them to their beauticians, who hear a great deal about what's wrong in marriages. Then I think people talk to their friends too. I think a problem is people tend to want to solve these things themselves first, then maybe they tell their mothers, which often makes it worse, then neighbors, bartenders, beauticians, so on. And they wait until it gets really bad and then are in a terrific crisis, and these other things haven't helped. And so they go to the counselor often very late in the game.
Right.
Do you think someone should train bartenders and beauticians to be marriage counselors?
I think what would really be helpful is many of them are good listeners, and I think that's a very important thing for a person who's having a problem. For once, someone will really listen to what they have to say and are concerned about them. But I think the important thing would be to help them have some training in terms of knowing when to refer, when a person has a serious problem that they should be concerned about, and who they can refer to, who are competent people that in the community that these people can turn to for help.
We left out another big group who often meet family crises, marriage problems first, and that's the police, because they get called in family quarrels. They're often the first people that are called in really serious problems. And there are some training programs in various communities to train police about understanding family problems more and how to deal with the initial problem while people are so angry, but then how to refer them for further counseling and where.
What kinds of problems do people present to marriage counselors?
Okay, I think one of the things that happens is there's always what people present and when they call up on the phone or during their first session, and then what the real problem is in terms of the dynamics of the relationship.
Can you go into both a little bit and maybe list some of each?
Well, I think most people now, I think the most frequent kinds of complaints, initial complaints, are we can't communicate, we seem to have problems sexually, we have problems with our finances, we have problems with our in-laws. In a sense, in many cases, these are symptoms of really general problems that they have in their relationship, making decisions, agreeing on values, etc. I think one of the ironic things is, though, that people say we can't communicate. You know, that's our basic problem. That's really a myth. People, there's a saying that goes, it's impossible not to communicate. The very fact you're sitting there communicates something to me, non-verbally. What they really mean is that when I want to say what I'm feeling and what's upsetting me, you don't listen, you don't understand, and you don't let me know if you do understand. It's not that you're not communicating, you're communicating feelings and things all the time. It's that you're not feeling understood. So I think that is kind of an overall pervasive problem that most people complain about.
Well, I think to go a little further with this communication, just to make it clear, lots of people can't talk to each other about what their problems are. You communicate when you walk out the door and slam it. But that's not very helpful communication. So one of the things we mean is people feel they can't talk to each other about what bothers them most.
And they can't solve the problems that keep coming up,
Right.
the persistent things that
I think
can't
the
make
kinds
decisions.
of things you're talking about that people might bring to professional marriage counselors in private practice is perhaps a little different from what people might bring to a family service agency, where often the cost is nothing or small. And I think there people tend to come at a moment of big crisis, like a child has run away, or the husband has become a very severe drinker, or the wife, or they have no money. One of the things that one tends to forget about when you're thinking only of well-to-do people and their marriage problems is that many people who don't have a lot of money, the great big marriage problem is that there isn't enough money to live on, and the husband can't earn enough. And I think today this problem is getting much worse, that many marriages that would go along pretty well,
if they had adequate.
when you add to it the terrible pinch of not enough money to live on, then that adds to some problems that weren't too bad. You know, we can stand a lot when we're eating well. When we're not eating so well, we can't stand things as much. So I'd say money problems in marriage go everywhere, but they're particularly harsh for people who don't have a lot.
I often hear wives say about their husbands, he won't talk to me. Does this come under the general heading of communication again?
Sure. I think one of the things they say, he won't talk to me, but often what happens is when they want to, they say, let's talk, you know. But what many times they really want is, I want to talk, you listen, you know. I have a lot to say, but we phrase it in a way like we should talk. They're really not interested in what the other person has to say. They have a lot of feelings and a lot of things that they're upset about that they want to share.
And one of the techniques some marriage counselors use is helping people to listen,
Right.
as well as to talk.
And a very simple technique that couples can use or people can use in relationships is simply having, let's say for example that you and I have a problem we can't discuss, and I don't feel you really understand me. So I state my position, and before I let you speak and tell me what you think, you have to repeat back what I said. Now what that does is that helps me to understand that she knows what I was saying. And a lot of times in conversations and in conflict, people aren't understanding each other. And just that simple technique of stopping and saying, okay, we each get a turn to speak, but before you can present your position, you have to repeat back what I've said. And a lot of times that clarifies things enough where they realize they didn't even disagree as much as they thought.
Catherine, do you think there's still people who resist, you know, the idea of marriage therapy, marital therapy?
Yeah, I think a great many people do. I think it's not just that they don't want to admit that they have a serious problem, there's that. I think many people are afraid of it. There's so much misunderstanding of what a counselor does, probably because there are lots of different kinds of counselors that people have had experience with. But people will frequently say, I don't want to go down there because I don't want to be told what to do. I don't want anybody getting into my private affairs and telling me what I have to do. Well, a good counselor, well-trained, never tells people what to do. A good counselor, one, is a very good listener and helps people understand themselves better, because as they talk about what's wrong, they begin to see it differently. A counselor can make a suggestion, like, have you thought of doing it this way? But the counselor always leaves it up to the person in terms of how this seems and whether the person or the couple would want to react to it. That is, counselors don't tell people to go do things, not well-trained counselors. I think people will sometimes think, if I have to see a counselor, that means I'm nuts in the head. And so they'll say, I'm not crazy, I don't have to go.
Also, some people don't think they have a problem, right? I mean, it's not my problem, it's yours.
They hope it's going to go away.
Yeah.
They don't like to admit it's there. I think some people are afraid of records. Or that they are afraid if, say, a woman's an alcoholic and her husband wants her to get treatment, and he's afraid that if they go and talk about it, then it'll get on a record and maybe he'll lose his job because his wife has this problem. He's afraid that the counselor might talk to other people. There's a great deal of concern about what might happen if you talk to anyone. You know, the news will get out. And confidentiality is one of the first hallmarks of professional counseling. That what happens is just between you and the counselor has a privilege like doctors do when it's well organized, that he won't talk. I mean, it is totally confidential. People are afraid of things like this.
You mentioned training. I'm interested to know what kind of training you think a marriage counselor should have, and are there some regulations, are there some ways people can tell?
Well, there's currently in the United States, there is one nationally recognized organization that does certify people, and that's called the American Association of Marriage and Family Counselors. Now, it's a growing organization, but there's, in terms of the number of people practicing marriage and family counseling in this country, it really represents a very small minority. So that in most cities there might only be 10 in large cities, maybe
You mean
10
trained, certified? Right?
certified people by this organization. And these people can be identified because if you look in the yellow pages, most of the yellow pages will list that organization under marriage counseling and the people who are certified. There are a lot of other people, however, who have had training in marriage counseling. Some ministers do get experience and go to special training programs. Some psychologists have had training, some psychiatrists. Social workers, by and large, have much more experience in marriage and family counseling than either of the two previous groups. I think one thing I can say, though, is that typically in graduate programs, in psychology and psychiatry, they deal much more with the individual, and only now are starting to train people in marriage and family counseling, so that many of them are not adequately trained. Even though they're good professional counselors, they haven't been given specific training in this subfield.
Are there some areas that you feel that are absolutely essential that they receive training in?
Well, I think one of the things that became very apparent to me when I was in graduate school is the difference between seeing a person individually and seeing them as a couple or as a family. Let me give you an example. When I was in training, a couple came and because they had marital problems. They also had individual problems, and in our training program, you were not permitted to see the husband and wife together. So what happened was I saw the husband and another counselor saw the wife. And we would compare stories at the end of the evening. He had seen the wife and I had seen the husband. And it sounded like we were talking about a completely different relationship. What he heard and what I heard were very different. In addition, the husband that I saw was very talkative and outgoing and really enjoyed the freedom to explore different things. Conversely, the wife had a hard time talking. Well, after not making a lot of progress this way, we were able to see the couple together with the two of us as counselors and the husband and wife. So there were 4 of us in the room. We saw things very differently. We now saw the husband, who had previously been talking to me and very verbal, not being able to say a word. His wife was talking all the time, and she wouldn't let him say anything. And also the stories that they would tell, they'd say, no, that's not true. You don't remember it right. And they would try to clarify. And it wasn't until we saw the couple, in other words, together, that we started to see some of the dynamics that were causing problems. So I would see one of the really important things in a training program, the opportunity to work with couples and to work with families under supervision, so you can see the difference.
Do you agree?
Yeah, I'd like to pick up on what David had said about seeing couples together. I had my first training in family social work, and in our case too, the idea was you always saw the husband alone and the wife alone, because your idea was they each had their own secrets to tell. They didn't want the other one to know, so that it gave them a chance to tell all this to the counselor, you see, confidentially. But then the real issue is how they relate to each other. And the real issue is the secrets they're holding back from each other that are causing problems in the marriage. So then there was a shift with the idea maybe, you know, we ought to have husband and wife really talk to each other in counseling. And I really, that isn't what you always do, but I think it's very helpful. One of my friends who has gone this route recently told me that the most helpful thing was things that she had wanted to say to her husband and never had the nerve. When the counselor was there, she had the nerve, because if her husband got furious, then the counselor could calm him down. And then he told me that he could talk to his wife with a counselor there, sort of as a safety net, because she cried when things were said. Well, she could cry on the counselor and not on him. He'd had enough of it, you know. So also think the counselor could point out to them, look, this is where you two get mixed up. This is what you're saying to each other, and as I hear it, this is the point at which you begin to get into trouble and are talking, you know, this way to each other instead of like this. It doesn't mean that you always have to go as a couple in marriage counseling. Like you could say, the counselor, I would like a time with you by myself because there are things I want to talk over without the other one present. You know, this can be done too. But I do think it's a very good trend.
Which brings me to my next question. It's obviously very important to choose someone who's competent. How can you tell when you're not in the field?
Well, I think the first thing would be to try to turn to someone who's a member of this organization.
Mm-hmm.
And many times, if they're busy, they can also give you a list of people in the area who are in training or who are, you know, at least respected by the community, professional community. I think another thing is that you should discuss with the counselor what kind of training he has had and find out how long the treatment plan is set up for and how much it's going to cost. Whether the couple is going to be seen together, for example, for 4 to 6 weeks, and then on the basis of that evaluation, then decide whether to go on. I think another really, very important thing is not just credentials, but how you feel when you're with that counselor. Do you feel like you can express yourself? Do you like him as a person, him or her? And do you feel you can relate personal things? Because if you can't, then that's not the kind of person you should be spending your time and money with.
I would support that, and I'd like to go a little further so people might get a clearer idea. There has always been a problem that some individuals set themselves up as counselors mostly to make money, and they don't really have the credentials, but they advertise themselves as counselors. One of the trends today is people that set themselves up as sex counselors, it's sort of the in thing, who have maybe taken a couple of weeks course or read a book, and now they are doing sex counseling. I think the person, and maybe you could check on this, David, ought to have at least a master's degree in a field like counseling or social work or psychology or sometimes family sociology at the least. Many of these people have MDs or PhDs. One might say, well, who needs all that in order to do counseling? Well, you need to have a good understanding of human physiology as a counselor. You need to have a very good understanding of why people behave the way they do, of psychology and human development. You have to have a good understanding of why different people have different kinds of customs and values, which you learn in sociology and anthropology. And you have to have a good understanding of the community in which people are and the resources that might be in that community. Besides all that knowledge, you need skills in working with people in a counseling relationship. So as David has mentioned, you need counseling experience well supervised by somebody who is a highly trained, experienced counselor. It's a very delicate field, and a counselor who's not well trained can really do a great deal of damage and really hurt people.
Let me give you a hypothetical situation. We don't have a lot more time. But what if you walk into a counselor's office and you like the person personally, and that person says, well, I do joint counseling. How are you going to know which kind of counseling is good for you? Is there a way to know that, or do you just take your chances?
I don't think there's an easy way to know. There's so many new approaches developing all the time. That's why it's really important to have some credentials and to know what that person's credentials are, and to also have a basic trust in that person's capacity to choose from the variety of skills that.
But a lot of counselors only do one thing, right?
Right.
I mean,
I think what you're getting at is there's a problem in that many counselors pick a topic, or like sex counseling, or a given approach, and they fit all their clients into that approach. And I think that's detrimental to many clients, to feel like, and to be kind of placed into a mold. But it is hard to evaluate. I think that's a real serious problem, and it points up the need for certification in all states. It's just beginning in a few states around the country.
There's one more. We only have a couple of more minutes, and there's one more thing that I'd like to get in. How much influence does the value judgment of the counselor have on the couple?
Well,
I know that's very general, but if you can just say something about that.
I think one of the things that we're starting to see now as values in our culture are changing somewhat. For example, issue of what kind of relationship we want, how we want to work out who does what around the house, and the role relationship between the couple, is I think many counselors have been brought up in the very middle class, with very middle class ideals, and tend to reinforce those very traditional values. Now, I think there's an increasing awareness among counselors that they shouldn't do that. They shouldn't impose their values on their clients. But that is a problem that's there. And that, for example, as I said earlier in the show, many women are coming because they have problems. Their husbands are saying, you know, it's okay if you work as long as you still take care of the house and the children and handle all the things you did in the past. Well, a more understanding counselor would help that couple realize and make that transition to kind of redefine their relationship so there's more sharing between the husband and wife.
David, we're out of time. I'm very sorry. Thank you for watching, and good night.
Production funding provided by public television stations, the Ford Foundation, and the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.